We talk about decentralization and then annihilation. Bitcoin, Litecoin, Litecoin, your coin, blockchain, baby. Mondays at 1600 hours Eastern Studio A.
Hello there.
Deep understanding must arise during these times of unparalleled deceit. A view into the depths of society upon which this country has fallen. A storm brews upon the horizon. It's been said that those that have the eyes to see and the ears to hear will play a paramount role in the furthering of humanity and civilized society. But can civilized society and humanity survive the coming conflicts not seen since a dawn of time in ages bypast? But you can find true forms of information and knowledge in abundance at revolution.radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the globe. Stand upon the right side of history.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hi, welcome tonight to Three Blonde Magicians, and tonight we have with us Christine Hart, myself, Lisa Luna from America, and Zeraphina Angelus as your host from Scotland. We're coming in live from all those different places, and a very exciting guest tonight, celebrity guest for the first time here on the show. I'm going to let his fiancée introduce him, so over to you, Zeraphina.
Thank you, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce one of the most influential black magicians of our time. It is the founder of Become a Living God, Mr. EA Koetting.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on with you guys today.
Thank you, and I'm very fortunate in that I get to speak to EA all the time, and I get to ask him a lot of questions. So I'm going to hand over, first of all, we're going to be talking about entities again this week, and I'm going to hand over to Christine just to ask some questions.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Zeraphina. Welcome, Eric. How are you getting on today?
Spectacular. Thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, good. I'm going to take a deep dive because I know we just got an hour and, people are hungry for you to sort of hear, you speaking. So I'm going to go straight in and working with entities, something that, I've listened to your shows in the past, your lectures, and, learned different things and learned about working with sigils. But I still don't really know about, what to do, what working with an entity means. Do you clock in with them each day? Do you listen to what they've got to say? So how does it work?
Well, it's said when you're teaching a child how to learn that you first learn how to read, and then after that you read to learn. It's kind of a similar thing with spirits, where the first bit of your spiritual ascent should be focused on learning how to communicate with spirits, learning how to call them, speak with them, and then after that, really the spirits take the reins and they can start teaching you directly. And so The biggest, or I guess the most common time that you would turn to the spirits is, of course, when you need something, when you need an answer, when you need direction or guidance. I guarantee every single person that's human has had the experience of feeling like we're out of our depth, that something in life has caught us off guard, and we need something beyond ourselves to help. Some people reach out in prayer, and that even can be a way of communing with spirit. Or you can directly call upon the spirit that you're looking for to give you the answer, the guidance, or even to open up the doors of circumstance for you.
And
But it's...
sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
In your case, do they speak to you inside your mind telepathically?
They can. I'm on. You asked if I do this on a daily basis, and I wake up and I kind of attune myself to my spirits and my guardians and my guides, and I'll light candles in my temple in the morning and I'll get the energy going, kind of create that connection. Then through the day, if I'm doing a consultation with a client or working through something, I will have a voice that will come in my mind telepathically, or an understanding that will just be given to me of what I need to do or how to proceed. And a lot of times, if I can stop and appreciate that and say, wait a minute, this is something that's coming from someone else, I can actually reach out and feel, well, who is that? And I can feel, is that Azazel? Is that Lucifer? Is that Beelzebub? It could be any of these amazing spirits that I work with, and usually I can pinpoint the feeling of it, much like, you can tell the difference between your grandmother coming up behind you and giving you a hug versus, your neighbor. You can feel that energetic difference, and you can kind of distinguish between the spirits that way. But they are almost always speaking and giving guidance if we're open to it. And this is kind of why it does require that we ask for that. It's not necessarily that they're withholding and waiting for us to ask the question, but it's just that in asking, we finally become open to that answer that's going to come from usually a more subtle type of communication.
Yeah. Have you ever used automatic writing to kind of hear them better?
Absolutely. Automatic writing, Ouija boards even, anything that uses the ideometer effect, which is basically your ideometer is basically your mind connecting to your nervous system and creating unconscious twitches that will guide a planchette or guide a pendulum or even automatic writing. And that can, that can be good. What I've seen that's good for, automatic writing, is it's really good for getting myself into the trance state. And then once I'm there, I can kind of just start internally communing with the spirit. But, as far as the way that spirits communicate with us, I believe that when we ask a question, they may or may not give us a direct answer. We may have something come into our mind, or we may not. But almost every time we will have circumstances start giving us that answer. So even if they tell us something, we're also going to see that same thing in the newspaper. Aunt Susie's going to say it at dinner. It's going to pop up to us in a million different ways to tell us what, and to the point you'll see signs on the road that are exactly answering the question you have. Grand Junction. I remember seeing Grand Junction. I don't remember what the question was, but I was driving through Colorado and I saw Grand Junction. I was like, that was the exact answer. Thank you so much.
And how do you know when you finish working with a specific entity? How do you know it's time to move on and try someone else?
A lot of times I'm the kind of person that I fixate and obsess on something. So I will basically milk the spirit dry of everything that it wants to give me. And usually I'll reach a summit where the spirit finally will actually direct me on to the next path. For instance, when I was highly engaged in Haitian Vodun or voodoo, I went through several initiations and then was actually told by Papa Legba, who's kind of the head of the pantheon in voodoo, said, it's time for you to take a break from us and go start working with Azazel. And so that actually made that transition that I started working with Azazel and learned a million different things that completely took my path in a different direction. But that was actually given to me by a spirit from a completely separate system, completely different part of the world. I had no idea that these spirits even knew about each other, but it seems that they do.
And Azazel, he's pretty interesting. Is that the same entity, as the Muslims called Iblis?
So this is one of the big I think disputes. In one way we can say that all demons, all evil beings, and even people who are choosing evil are aspects of Satan or Iblis or the great dark father. But I do think that these have separate identities. Once you start working with them, this is one of the unshakable truths that I've come across in all of this. I really think I would have been comforted if I could have just thought that these were all aspects of my psyche or something like that. But each of these beings has their own feeling. They have their own preferences, their own dislikes that are completely unique and that sometimes surprise you, and that you kind of have to learn, just like you learn in any relationship with any being. And so these are very, very distinct beings. But Iblis is a being that I've worked with quite a bit. I know last week's conversation, I've been tuning in to your guys' show, and I'm loving what you're doing. Last week you had a fellow that was talking about the jinn, and he actually made an interesting point that he works with Allah in order to be able to work with these jinn and to even commune with them. And he said the only other way to do that is if you were to go to Iblis, and you don't want to do that. Well, I do want to do that, actually, because you're basically going to the king of the jinn at that point and working directly with him.
I agree, actually. Yeah, I agree. He is the king of the jinn. It probably is a good idea to work with him first. I think he is very similar to Azazel in that, he said to God, "Oh, you've created man. Why must I bow to man?" and refused to bow. So it's a kind of similar story, isn't it?
Well, Azazel actually might be a bit different because Azazel actually had a bit of a different approach when he saw what man was doing, what man was becoming. He said, "Aha, these beings could actually become greater than the gods. All they need is the tools of the gods." And so he gave us the tools of the gods, being first fire. And so Azazel was the first Prometheus to give man fire in legend. And so he gives man fire, witchcraft, knowledge of war, knowledge of sex and sex magic, and even makeup and jewelry. He gave us the instructions for these. All of these things that really bring us out of the animal state and start to build a structure of humanity that's beyond animal.
Have you ever considered working with Hindu gods like Shiva, the Nagas?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The Naga, not so much. That's actually a scary realm for me. The Naga are very. At that point, you're almost dealing with what I believe to be extraterrestrials when we're dealing with Naga, fish people, such like that. But and that's I'll tell you what, I will look into the eyes of any demon I summon, but I still am just terrified of anything that flies an alien craft. And so yeah, so not the Naga, but but Shiva and I mean Brahma. I really consider, I think. Not necessarily Hinduism, but more Tantra and yoga to be my foundation in my spirituality. They give such a rich bed of mythology to really draw from and to rest on.
Oh, do you recommend any books for Tantra and yoga that we could buy and study?
So one that the book that I recommend a good primer is 8 Lectures on Yoga by Aleister Crowley, and that's basically these lectures that he gave on the 8 limbs of yoga. Really excellent way of becoming familiar with the yogic system. And then there's a book called The Yoga of Power by Julius Evola. And both of these books were written in the early 19th century or 1900s, and both of them are really, really touch on the I think the metamorphic capabilities of both of these systems. That they're not about calling the gods or the spirits to help you. They're about calling them into you to transform you to become like them.
Oh, right. And that's what your whole basis of your spirituality is based on?
It really, I mean, well, I would say Hinduism as a whole it gives a really good, like a bed of that mythology that I feel really comfortable with, and it does explain a lot. But that's not necessarily where I come. I basically draw everything I can from everywhere. If I see, whether it's a spiritual system or a nursery rhyme or a game that you can play, everything I'm seeing the more ascendant, transcendental capabilities of all of these things. And now with most systems, whether we're talking about a religion or a magical practice or even a belief system, these systems are I would say about 90%. Dogma and unnecessary kind of stuff that's been built on truth. And so my job, I think, is to kind of peel back all of the things that aren't really necessary and get at the golden truth in all of these systems. And I think that whether we're looking at voodoo or Mormonism or Satanism or Hinduism, the underlying truths are pretty profound and pretty universal.
So what put you off about the Naga? Because I found their realm quite fascinating. I don't know, do you agree that it's at the center of the earth where they are, or it's a certain realm where they are? And I mean, are they actually serpents, or is that their shape?
You know, so all of these things are exactly why I've never called on them. Is like I think there's something different to me between being able to call a spirit into my temple and commune with it, and maybe I just have a proficiency in that makes me comfortable. But when, like you say, the Naga might be beings, physical beings that are living in this earth, or maybe under the sea is one theory. And it's really hard to say. One of the things that we see in a lot of these ancient civilizations, especially civilizations that disappeared, kind of like the Naga, there's a lot of evidence that they existed here as actual beings, but then just kind of vanished. A lot of these myths say that they jumped into the ocean or that they dissolved into the waters. But when we're talking about waters in a spiritual sense, that doesn't necessarily mean water. It might mean the ether. And so they basically went from being physical beings to being ethereal beings in a transcendental type of way, perhaps.
But you don't fancy communicating with them?
No, not yet. I mean, the Naga, they seem quite a bit like what people describe reptilian aliens to look like, and that's something. See, the thing I think I know about myself with my obsessive way that I go after things. If I started trying to find aliens, that would be the rest of my life's obsession. And so yeah, and honestly, I do think the Naga probably fall closer to that. They probably, to me, they do seem more like alien rather than spiritual entities.
Oh, that's really interesting, actually. Yeah, like the reptilians, the lizards that were here before us.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they are interesting. One thing I wanted to ask you is about spiritual attacks. And I had a experience with a serial killer that I was writing to because I used to work as a journalist. One of the Hillside Stranglers out there in America. Have you heard of the Hillside Stranglers?
Oh yeah.
Bianchi. I was writing to him for a period of 10 years. I wrote a book about him and then stopped talking to him, obviously didn't like the book. And then next thing, I was having really bad hallucinations. Like I would be sitting there having coffee with a friend and suddenly I would see them like with their heads cut off or like their body stretched out. It eventually kind of died down, but I was really scared of it because it was, and I felt him trying to remote view me a lot. And in dreams, I would suddenly, like, I'd be eating body parts or something, and I'd be like, whoa, what am I doing? And then I would kind of feel his presence. And I started talking to him again after 10 years, and he's got like electronic email now, like a JPay they have out there in America for their prisoners. And I asked him about it, and he said, oh, you've blogged about me doing that. I want you to take it down. And, you know, I was trying to test him, and I said, look, will you meet me astrally somewhere? So we did that, and he's very psychic. He could meet me astrally. And he asked, could he ring me? So I said, yeah, that's okay. And apparently, you know, they're allowed to ring even England, which is weird. I guess you guys out there are kinder to your prisoners. Anyway, after he'd spoken to me, now it was only about 10 minutes, and then his money ran out. But after that happened, I felt almost like giant rats were crawling all over me. And I'd been working a bit with Shemyaza. I'd used a sigil that Brian Barrett gave me, Shemyaza's sigil, and I was trying to stop it. And then I pulled out this Shemyaza, and then it just went like that. What's your opinion about someone like that, someone like Bianchi? Do you think he's working with an entity, or, you know, what he did gave him some kind of power himself, or is it perhaps something around him? What is it that kind of has that ability to do that?
No, great questions. And I think there are several things working together. So any of us, if we get upset at someone and we start thinking negatively about them, specifically if we start attaching our thoughts to emotions and then attaching the thoughts and emotions to physiological states, that's when we really are pushing energy towards that person. Now, an average person, I pulled a random person off of the street and said, you know, I want you to tell me the most hideous, you know, monstrous things you can think of doing to your enemy. Most people are going to have some wild things, but they're going to be pretty unrealistic. And somebody like Bianchi, he knows what murder looks like. And so when he's thinking about hatred, he's seeing it in a way that you and I just can't see. That you really have to have gone that far to understand what his hatred really can look like and feel like. And I think he was showing you that. So for one, he has a better stockpile of horror to draw from than most of us. And that on its own gives him more hatred to push towards his enemies. And then even that with the hatred he has done, the murdering of another person, I mean, that obviously this is not something anybody should ever do, but that is something that is going to draw extremely dark, malevolent spirits forth. And so there are spirits that they're seen across just about every religion, you know, whether they're shadow people or bodocks, or there's always these black creatures that show up whenever there's human suffering, and these beings definitely, I'm sure, showed up at all of his murders, and that they grew in an army around him.
Really?
Obvious. Yeah, obvious. And obviously, you know, they've extracted their sacrifices and on him and his life and on others. But yeah. And, you know, if he was a master of these spirits, well, first, if he had been a master of these spirits in the beginning, I think he would have been able to control the situation a bit better, control himself, and he wouldn't have been compelled to enact that in horrific ways. And I mean, because really once you can get into communication with spirits, if you're doing it in a way that's looking at how you can make your life better, there's no end to what you can do to make your life better. And unfortunately, if you're opening yourself to these beings that are attracted to malevolence, well, that's just what they're going to try to increase.
Oh, I see. So do you think that before he started doing what he was doing, they grew in him, and it was them that kind of pushed him into it?
You know, yeah, this is I think that they probably, I would say yes, that probably early on, and not, I don't have any specific knowledge about this figure, this person, other than what I've read in books and such. But I would say for anybody that's doing these extremely evil things of causing suffering to other people, that they are going to have malicious spirits that start to haunt them and create an obsession and push them. And What they're doing, though, all the time is they're going to be able to make opportunities present themselves and then suggest that you take those opportunities. They can't actually force you to take those opportunities. There is such a thing as free will that even does come down to the point of like you said, psychic combat or psychic attack or magical attack, spiritual attack, that even when we're under attack, we can will it to stop by becoming aware of it and just asserting our will and our autonomy over our own selves, and that will eject it. Like that even when people will hold up a cross or whatever their symbol is and pray, that is simply a matter of exercising that autonomous will over your own being.
Mm-hmm. Do you think when he phoned me, because it was weird, it was supposedly a friendly phone call, that the rats calling over me, was that him hating on me? I didn't really understand.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm going to tell you, you are probably more gifted and more sensitive than he is. I mean, I'm just going to say that just because I'm pretty sensitive and I'm feeling that you're able to actually pick apart what's happening in the spiritual dimensions a lot more astutely than he is. And so I think he was just sending you, and with them being rats, it wasn't just malicious intention, but also manipulative intention. So that the rats would be, I mean, just like the when we call a person a rat, they're the manipulative person that you can't trust. And so I think that was definitely coming through his energy, and that it manifested in a way that you were able to perceive it as a symbol of what it actually is. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So he was thinking that I was like a rat and not for real.
No, I think his ratty energy of trying to manipulate you or trying to feel out what you knew or what you were telling or whatever. I think his rat-like energy was manifesting in a way that you were able to perceive.
Really? Well, it was really dirty. I mean, that's dirty. But then again, I suppose he's been doing what he's been doing, which is really dirty. And he's been in prison for 30 years. So he's probably, I mean, he was in the hole, as they call it, for many, many years. I mean, that's just in a dark, little dank thing so he's probably become one, probably with those shades or something like that.
Yeah. Well, and when he's, kind of the intuitive sense I'm getting from him, and this is probably true of most serial killers and such, is I sense that there's a psychic vampirism going on there too. That he doesn't have a lot of connection with normal people. And so when he can connect with someone, it actually is something that he can start pulling energy from you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And whether or not he's, I don't think Bianchi particularly, I don't think he's sitting there reading books on the occult and practicing his meditations. I think that all of this comes from sitting alone and stewing over things for a very long time. And I think, I mean, that in itself is its own kind of, not that I suggest anybody go throw curses, but if you wanted to curse somebody, really, if you sit and just stew over all the evil things you want to have happen to that person, eventually you think bad things are going to start happening to them. Of course, once again, you're also going to surround yourself by those same malicious spirits, and if you do that too much, that's going to cause issues all around.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I'd like to help him in some kind of way, but he's not honest. Like, he's trying to get out of prison, so he says, I didn't do those murders, which I think is wrong for him. And then he sent me loads of his poetry, and it's full of gloating, full of complete gloating. He says he's not interested in the occult, yet it was dripping in occultic symbols. It was like Edgar Allan Poe had written poetry, and it was like, I feel, why doesn't he just be honest about who he is and, connect back to God or something? I just feel it's a shame that, he's just gonna, I don't know, descend into whatever, nothing good anyway.
Yeah, one of the standards that I've had to set for helping people is first off, I can't help somebody if it comes at a cost to my own self. I mean, if I'm taking away from helping myself by helping another, it's got to be somebody that I absolutely love, and then also when helping someone, make sure that you're actually helping somebody that wants your help. Most people actually don't want your help. And one easy way of doing this is make them ask you for it. If they're not asking for help, if they're not willing to say, here's what I actually need, then it really is, I think there's something inside of ourselves we're trying to fulfill by helping them.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Yeah, I think probably I'm trying to rescue something in myself.
Yeah, sure. And you know, and I mean, just to be the psychic person here, I feel like you've probably lost so many people downriver that you weren't able to help, that it just pains you to do that and see that again.
Yeah, it does, actually. Yeah, I had the same experience in childhood as you know, like kids' homes and, you know, that kind of thing. And, yeah, it is. I just hate to see, you know, I know he didn't have parents and he was shunted around foster homes. You know, I felt that had something to do with it. And, you know, influenced by something and just ended up in there because he was really young when those murders were going on. And I think with serial killing, it happens like really quickly, you know, like he had over a period of months it happened. And it's almost like, you know, as Brian Barrett was saying, it's like an entity is gripping on and it only gets a certain amount of time to do what it wants to do. And then it kind of has to let go. And, but definitely when I met him, when I flew over there to meet him, it was definitely in him. I sat there with him and he seemed like normal. And then suddenly it was almost like something inhuman was there, something that I felt was almost like loads and loads of razor blades coming at me all at once. It was really...
Yeah. Did that occur along with a shift in the conversation or with a remark that he made?
I was just sitting there with him and, you know, he's got these big blue eyes and I suddenly looked at him and I thought, wow, he looks just like he looked when he was younger. And then I think for some reason it came into my mind about what he'd done. There was a lot of torture involved in it. And I started to feel a vibe of Nazi. And it was almost like I felt like I was at the Nuremberg trials or something. I really felt almost like I was inhaling something Nazi. And then I started to feel it almost coming over me. And I felt a feeling of fear, almost like I was in the presence of something that wasn't human and that could eat me in some kind of way. And it was a really weird feeling. I felt like I was like frozen. And then I felt like I was food. It was definitely not non-human.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think people have said some similar things about being in the presence of John Wayne Gacy, particularly, and Ted Bundy. That specifically with Ted Bundy, when Ted would start to admit the things, you know, when he would talk about things in an honest way, you would see a shift in his eyes, and you know, I've been told that when I get upset, that people will see my eyes change pretty radically too. But yeah, there's a shift where all of a sudden it is almost like you're looking at a reptile rather than a human. And you know, with John Wayne Gacy, he almost always seemed to have that presence that people were just at a loss for words and trying to catch their breath just around him. And you know. There is a I think a valley or maybe it's a plateau of experience that a serial killer has that the rest of us don't have, and you know that is part of why it's taboo. Is like we're not supposed to hunt each other, man. But when somebody does, you know, so I've been friends with a lot of people who were military special forces, and you know, still have several friends that were military special forces, and every now and again when I'm talking to them, I'll kind of get the same feeling, and it's not so much that they're not human, but it's more like they see other humans almost the same way a hunter will see a deer.
Well, that's odd you should say that because I felt a bit like a deer, yes.
Yeah, and really, I mean, most of us are. Like most of us are not predators. Most of us don't train our predatory senses, and thankfully, most of us have never killed another person, and nor, you know, once again, nor should we. And so that kind of experience I think that does change a person at a fundamental level, especially you know when it's somebody that's compelled to do it not in service of their country or their their way of life or anything, but just because they're compelled to do it. That is that when you say that it builds fast, yeah, I imagine it does, because anything that we're going to do that is exceptionally risky, we're going to think once and twice and three times about it, and most of the time we're going to be able to come to our senses. But one of the things that I've seen is a common thread with serial killers is that they'll fantasize over murder or rape or whatever it is that their fantasy and their ritual is. They'll fantasize over that, but they'll kind of keep it at bay until they have some upsetting life circumstance, usually the end of a relationship. That's almost always the case, that a relationship ends, or that there's some turmoil in their relationship, and they snap, and that's kind of the trigger that causes most serial killers to commit their first crimes.
I think with Bianchi, it was his girlfriend giving him VD that set him off, and and then he was off and running. But you're saying that predatory thing, that thing that made me feel like a deer, was that? So that was, I assume that was the demon inside him. So that was actually him.
It starts to get difficult. If somebody is working consciously in league with the demons that they're working with, they can become what's called perfectly possessed, and that's a term that is used by the Catholic Order of Exorcists to catalog different ranges of possession. And perfect possession is when you know that the spirits are there, you know that they're possessing you, and you are perfectly okay with it. And so, I can't say, once again, I can't really speak for Bianchi or his situation, but, if that's where he's at, then it would be really hard to distinguish between him and the spirit that possesses him.
Oh, I see. So he was probably, yeah. He's probably like that.
And it probably could be, it probably could jump back and forth. I performed a ritual, where my ex-wife was inside of the triangle of manifestation, where I evoked into full manifestation the demon Belial, and this was with her cooperation in this all, and she became possessed by Belial, the demon, fully, and we exorcised her after the ritual, and I exorcised her several times, but to this day, if I see her, if I'm interacting with her, I can see her switch, and I can see Belial look at me from inside of her, and her face changes. She always will give a really wicked type of smile, and her eyes are completely different, and her voice is different if she talks as Belial. And so to this day, that spirit is still in her that will pop out every now and again. And so. With Bianchi, or with anybody who's possessed by malicious or malevolent spirits, or any spirit really, you can kind of see that where the human is talking, then the other thing will kind of take over, and it'll usually come out and only deliver a couple of sentences, or it'll come out and smile and kind of witness something.
Yeah, it came out and kind of, just witnessed something. And his eyes did change. They're very baby blue, and they seem to go darker. Yeah.
Did you get cloudy at all?
Yeah, that kind of thing, yeah. And then he went back to normal. He said, "Chrissie, you okay?" And I looked at him and I thought, he just changed back,
Well, and so on the topic, I was kind of thinking today as I was getting excited for this conversation about entities and the range of entities. And so those malicious entities, obviously that's a type of entity that exists, but those aren't the kind I like to play with, and nor do I recommend. But they're I do think that at least some of what people are experiencing as UFOs are actually entities that are phasing in and out of this time space. I think that there are entities all over around us. I had one of my mentors that told me early on, I think I was 19 years old, and he said, if you could see what was in the sky, you would never leave your house. And I was like, really? He goes, yeah, it's crowded. The world is crowded with spirits around you. And it's almost like right now there are radio waves moving everywhere around me. I don't have a radio on, and if I did, I'd have to tune it to the right station. But just like that, there are spirits everywhere around us, and we just have to tune into them.
It is. It's getting stronger, actually. I just remembered. Sorry, Lisa, do you want to ask some questions to Eric? Sorry, I'm hogging.
That's okay. That's okay. How are you doing today, Eric?
Spectacular. How about yourself, Lisa?
I'm doing great. So it's my understanding that you're the Jamie Oliver of the magical world. Is that right?
I don't know who that is. John Oliver. I'm John. John Oliver. Oh boy.
John Oliver, yeah.
I will take that. I will take that compliment any day of the week.
Okay, good. Well, I have a couple questions. They're kind of basic for the beginner, that's first working with entities and spirits and things. So I found when I work with gods or goddesses, I have to divine first. Do you see yourself doing that, or do you recommend doing that? Because some entities don't, necessarily want to work with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the divination is really, really good. The first thing I would say, well, first, everybody, if you're compelled to or being drawn to a specific spirit, that spirit is probably whispering in your ear. The reason you're interested in him is probably because it's right there talking to you, trying to get you to pay attention. And so that's I think the first thing that I would start kind of observing. If you're thinking about calling a spirit or making some kind of contact, just ask yourself, is this coming from me? And now here's the really interesting part. If it's not coming from you, and we are really, really good at answering questions. Our minds work as question answering machines. And so if you ask yourself that question, is this coming from me? You'll get a clear something, yes or no, or a mix, but you'll get something. And then the next question to follow up with that, if it's not coming from you, or if there's a questionable nature as to whether it's coming from you, is it coming from a being that's in the room with me right now? And then and just as I asked this, I got chills just now. And then you can kind of go, okay, so where is that being? And if you can locate it, you are well on your way to making real contact. If you can determine where it's at, then start asking yourself questions about, well, if it's there, male or female, what size, what's the background, and your mind is actually going to be able to pick through all of those details and give you a pretty accurate story. Now, using something like a tarot, Lisa, what do you use for your divination system?
I use bones. I use throwing the bones divination.
Oh, awesome, yeah. So and really, with any divination system that works well for you that you're familiar with, yeah, dive into that. And I mean, one of the big things, if somebody's asking about multiple spirits, they're like, hey, I want to make contact with this spirit and this spirit and this spirit. Well, at that point, that's when I would really start diving into divination and figure out, what the order of operations. And more than anything, though, I would get clear on your intention. When you make contact with any spirit, any entity, they're going to influence you in ways that you don't even understand. Especially like Lisa, you're saying with gods and goddesses and deities, they're going to influence you massively. And so you do have to be careful and make sure that you're bringing something into your reality that you want as part of your reality.
Right, you have to approach them in the correct way as well, because I've had experience. I've been practicing for quite a while, and you're constantly learning like a child, and I've had experience where I approached a deity in the wrong way, and I quickly understood that you need to do your homework, and you need to approach with care. So also like protection and stuff like that, what do you do as far as protecting yourself when you're calling on a particular entity? What do you do to protect yourself from maybe a different entity coming forth?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, no, I'm glad you divided that too, because I will never protect myself from the entity I'm calling. If I'm afraid of the entity I'm calling, I'm probably going to think twice about calling it. To me, it's a lot like I wouldn't invite somebody in my home if I have to have a gun pointed at them. So similarly, I think really the biggest the biggest piece of advice I can give, and we can talk about protections. I'll hit that in a minute. But the biggest piece of advice I can give with any kind of spirit working is familiarity. You are building a relationship, and so get to know the spirit. Start, like you said, study, research, figure out who the spirit is to other people, who they have been historically. Get the feeling of who they are, and if you do this, even if you spend, let's say, 3 days really devoting yourself to studying that spirit, by the time you call them, they'll already be there, and you'll be able to feel the essence of that. Now, as far as making sure that no unintended spirits get in, this is a really good point. And Zeraphina and I have had some mutual experiences with this of calling on Beelzebub, for instance, and then immediately after having a bunch of little lower spirits come and try to present themselves as the real thing, and there is. You can do, sage smudging. I'll use sage smudging quite a bit, and I'll do consecrated water that I'll sprinkle around, and I've got wards up that I'll cleanse and reignite, and do stuff like that. But really, you're not necessarily. I don't know that you're going to be able to really dive into spirit communication, spirit contact, and not have uninvited spirits come around. And so the biggest thing is to develop a discernment that you can look at it and don't always assume that every voice is a good voice that you're coming across. Don't assume that the spirit is who you think it is. One of the greatest ways that you can determine whether or not you're speaking with the spirit that you want to speak with is you can pass them a piece of paper and ask them to sign it. They're usually, almost every time, they'll wave their hand over it or they'll make some sort of gesture. And in my spiritual vision, I'll see the imprint of their signature. I'll usually trace that over with a marker just so I can have the souvenir. And then the I guess astral law for some reason is that a spirit's not able to sign a name other than their own.
Oh wow, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I know I work with ancestors a lot, working with the bones. That's primarily who I work with, and whenever I work with an entity, I call on my ancestors to protect me. Do you do that? Do you call on like certain entities to protect you from other entities?
So I don't. I feel like I used to when I first started getting into ceremonial magic. But I specifically developed maybe a different way of dealing with this, and I started seeing specifically when I went out into the wilderness and would do different rituals outdoors, I would get a really eerie feeling, like something was watching me, something's behind me, and that, I mean, it's pretty much a constant. And so what I started doing, instead of trying to banish that, I'll stand still and I'll feel the fear of it, and I'll feel there's, because you do feel like you're in danger in those moments. And I'll kind of sit with that, and then I will announce out loud, I'm here as your friend. If you want to attack me, you're welcome to try. If you want to be friends, let's be friends. And almost every time, they are friends. I've never had a spirit that I've made that challenge to. I've never had one attack me, that they either disappear or they engage in a friendly way.
Right. When I was a child, I'm an empath, and I don't know if you find that empaths they're much easier to communicate with entities and stuff like that, but from the time I was a child, I had been visited by different spirits, and there was once when I was really young, about 11 years old, and the spirit was outside my window, and it was in the middle of the night, and it seemed very threatening at first, and of course I was terrified. I didn't know what it was, and I just kind of waited it out, and then after it went away, of course I ran in and told my parents. They thought I was crazy, and et cetera. So, but so whenever you're visited by any kind of a spirit or an entity, and you don't want it to be around, besides just saying, I want you to go away, what if it doesn't go away? Like, what would you recommend for people that are a little bit on the edge about dealing with certain spirits?
No, absolutely. Great question. So I've got a 17-year-old daughter, and where I've been doing my practices her whole life, she's grown up with poltergeist activity and hag attacks at night and all of that. And so we've had to have some preventative measures. So one of the things I'll do is I'll get some salt water and just regular tap water with I'll do cold water with just regular table salt that I'll mix in there, and I want to get it to a point that I can mix it with my fingers and I can lick my finger and taste the salt on my finger, and once I've got that bowl of water, I'll hover my hands over the water and kind of feel the magnetism of the water kind of pushing and pulling with my hands. And once I've got the energetic connection, I'll inhale and pull white light from every light source around me, from the sun, from lights that are shining, from everything. And inhale that, and I'll feel it coming into my body until I'm just glowing with light. And then as I exhale, I'll push that down through my hands. And this is something I've learned through Reiki and a lot of energy work, is just moving energy through your system. And you do that a few times until it just feels like the water in the bowl is glowing. Once it is, put that in a bottle, keep it by the nightstand. Keep it somewhere that these experiences tend to happen, and literally you can just tell the spirit to leave and then sprinkle that water where that spirit was standing. And sometimes, especially if it's a malevolent spirit, you can actually hear the spirit shrieking as it runs away. It's actually incredible.
Well, what about dealing with the different entities, the ancestors, demons, angels, poltergeists, like you said, approaching each type of entity? How do you do that? Is it different? I would imagine that it is during ritual or doing whatever little ceremony that you're performing. What are the differences approaching each one? Is it different for everyone, or is it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah. For different categories of spirits, it can be a completely different experience. For instance, if I'm working with anything demonic, the temperature in the room goes up. It seems like it gets extremely noisy in the room, and it's almost like there's a whirlwind of chaos going around me. Now, when I work with spirits of the dead, it feels like I'm underwater. I can't hear much of anything. The room gets hard to see through. It even will start to feel hard to move, and like everything's in water. And so the different spirits will have a complete, and this isn't just your perception, by the way. These are measurable effects. I did a series of experiments of having different gauges that were telling the humidity and the temperature in the room, and you could just watch all of these skyrocket and drop with the different entities that you call, and so they do have a different effect, and they need to be treated differently. Like, for instance, the temple that I work in almost every day is a demonic satanic temple, and so I work with the darker forces in here. If I want to call anything that's angelic or more light, I'm going to go outside into my garden, or I'm going to go somewhere that those spirits are more in tune and attracted to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. So, okay, so like the novice practitioner, if they wanted to start working with entities and stuff, is there one that's easier to work with than another one? I mean, do you recommend starting like with A and then working yourself up to B, C, D, E, or just jumping into whatever's calling you?
I think you made a really great suggestion, Lisa, of getting to know your ancestors. If you have a link to your ancestors, and even if you don't know who they are, for instance, I was adopted and I have no real knowledge of my ancestors, but I've done a lot of ancestor work that I've come to know that they are alive very much through me. And my blood is the same blood that flowed through their veins. It's really an amazing experience to have that ancestral spirit connection. And so that could be a great place to start. One of the things I would tell people to avoid doing is avoid just calling out for any spirit to come talk to me. There are a ton of spirits, and there are, and some of them that want to talk to you are not the best ones out there. And so, my suggestion would be to be targeted, to figure out, you can really do this by looking at what you want that spirit to do, what change you want to create specifically in yourself and your life. And then you can just do a Google search, say, what spirit is best for this such, for blank, and you'll get some spirits. I would suggest to balance your mind with your intuition. So don't just look for the one that you think is best, but actually, as you're doing your Google searches, as you're looking through the books and finding what spirit you want to work with, feel which one is pulling you. You're going to feel a gravity that one of them is going to have, or maybe a couple of them are going to have, and that's really the best place to start working. But in all cases, do make sure that those are spirits that you want to have in your life. You know, that there's a rule that I learned when I was learning voodoo, that once you call on a spirit and make a real connection with a spirit, that spirit's with you forever. And so if you just have a passing thing that you're trying to resolve, understand that spirit contact might be a permanent situation that you're invoking, if that makes sense.
Right,
that's really
like
interesting. Now, Lisa,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're out of time. Yeah, we're going to get cut off. Is this when the music comes in, it just blasts and nobody can hear anybody? It's going to cut in at any moment. Thank you, Eric, so much for coming on. It's just been great, and I hope you'll come back again.
It's been a delight, and I think we have so many things that we could talk about that I would love to come back on and just do this as many times as you guys would like to.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for answering that question.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
Lisa, to cut you in. Sorry. Thank you. Over to you, Zeraphina.
Yeah, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation it's been, and thank you so much for coming on and for telling us all your experiences and your thoughts on entities and everything spirit related.
Thank you so much. No, it's been a lot of fun, and I do really enjoy the radio show that you guys have going, and I'm excited to hear how it continues to evolve.
Absolutely, and hopefully we'll have you on again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Where can we get hold of you?
Yeah, so you can check out all of, I've got video courses, books, ritual tools, magical devices. You can check all this out at becomealivinggod.com, and you can also check out my Odyssey channel where I've got my entire video library, and I put out videos and do live chats once a week, and so you can check that out at odyssey.com/EA Koetting.
Oh, that's excellent. You're on Odyssey. I didn't realize that, so that's nice and handy.
It is. There's some really interesting shifts that are happening in our society, and I think we need safe places we can have conversations, and Odyssey is gracious to provide that.
Yeah, because it was a shame when you were YouTube. I mean, you, David Icke, Miles Johnson, Kerry Cassidy, you all went out on this big wave. It's like, I mean, but luckily you can find you guys round and about, and I was talking to David Icke earlier actually, and he's jumping on other shows and doing interviews, and so we can still find you all.
Absolutely.
For coming on. Thank you so much, and
thank you.
Soon. And thank you everybody for listening, and my beautiful co-host, and see you next week.
See you next week.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
You're going back in?
There's still men out there. God damn. When I go home, people ask me, "Hey, Hoot, why do you do it, man? Why? You some kind of war junkie?" I won't say a goddamn word. Why? They won't understand. They won't understand why we do it. They won't understand it's about the men next to you. And that's it. That's all it is.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, #1 listener-supported radio, the printing press for freedom at a time when freedom is needed the most.
I am Bill Johnson. Some consider my efforts to be an underground law school. I am not an attorney, and I do not give legal advice. I teach. That's lawful and legal. Consider yourself served. You are to appear Wednesday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern, Studio A. My forte? Foreclosure and contract law. Grab your legal pad and pen. Learn a broad spectrum of law spanning administrative, criminal, family.